Welcome to another episode of My BrainWise Coach. I am Bastian.
And I am Phil Dixon.
And we are so excited that you have decided to join us again for another episode of where we decode things that might be happening in our life by using the practical things of neuroscience and how our brain works. And last week, we embarked on a journey, Phil, of what we call, it had multiple names, but are you feeling stuck? Maybe you're in the midst of a life or career transition, or simply want to make a change in your life. And you actually took me as a participant through the different exercises, Phil. And then we explained those exercises to our BrainWise friends so that they could use that particular one in their own life in the event it's something that interested them. So last week, and I'll just recap the two activities we did, and then I know you want to take us through the map of how we go along this journey. This week we did two particular activities. One was called our Ikigai, which I've just lovingly labeled our sweet spot. How do you identify the sweet spot of things that you love doing, things that you're really good at, things that the community needs, and things that'll get paid for, right? Or kind of the summation of the four questions we asked. And then that helps you identify your sweet spot. And payment can come in various forms, as we described it last time, right? It can be monetary, it can be time, it can be quality, whatever it might be. There's different forms of payment. And then the other one we did was a pictures of the future, where we suggested to our BrainWise friends that maybe they go on ChatGPT and ask it to produce, 100 different pictures that might describe someone's future. And they actually go through and they select up to 30 different photographs that they want to depict or they believe depicts a part of their future, and then explain why it does, and then look for common themes. I did that in real time on our podcast, on our episode last week. So that's what we accomplished. And I know there's many more of those exercises because that's a starting point of our future, which I think today we're going to get into how do we enrich what our future description looks like. And then there's other things that'll help us be able to make decisions to get there. So why don't you share where, from your perspective, where we are and ground us in what the map is all about to help us then move into the next activity?
Yeah, we talked about the map, and if it were drawn up, then on the right-hand side, it's got the future that you were talking about. And the backdrop to the whole thing is what we would call your purpose or your Ikigai. The other components of the map, this is just as a reminder, is where you are today. And so really where you are today, your future that you want, and a pathway of getting there is the fundamental of the map. What we also look at is what's happened in the past, because the past casts a shadow over what you're thinking about today and what you're likely to be comfortable with in moving into the future. And then in addition to that, there's going to be a couple of other things we talk about. And that is, one is, we call it a variety of things. I'll call it self-discipline. And that is, do you have the discipline and the will and the determination, the resolve, whatever you want to actually then do the plan that you said you're going to do? And then the last piece is, what do you need from the outside world? What support do you need? But what I was thinking today we might do is to take some closer, digging deeper into getting a richer and more descriptive version of your future. Some of those we might be able to do in real time here, like we did last week. Some of them are more reflective and will require our BrainWise listeners to actually maybe think through. And again, reminder, one of the good things to do if you're thinking about the future, thinking about a change, is to get yourself a journal. And so we would encourage people to get a journal. But one of the things, so I'm going to jump right in.
Let's do it.
This is one that is more of a reflection. You might be able to do it in real time, but I'll leave that choice to you when you've heard it. And that is what we call a letter from the future. And that is, you are the ripe old age of...
I just turned 34.
There we go. So imagine yourself, if you will, and you are now my age, 75.
Perfect.
Okay. So it's 41 years away. And you are sitting somewhere very comfortable in a place that you really want to be in. It could be the beach. It could be a spa. It could be your home. It could be anywhere, just somewhere that you feel very comfortable. And then you are Cole at 75. Write a letter to the 34-year-old Cole. giving him some advice. Because by that time, you've got a whole bunch more wisdom. You've got a whole bunch more knowledge. You've got a whole bunch more experience under your belt. And what would that 75-year-old say to the 34-year-old?
Interesting. There are several things I can think of off the top of my head that I would love to be able to apply more thoroughly today. I'm sure my 75-year-old self is going to say, these are the things to focus on, which one of those is don't take life too seriously because it's very short. So be serious about your intentionality in being able to help others and to serve the kingdom. But there are a lot of things in life that are just don't take it too seriously.
Yeah.
The other one is, it's very interesting because I've always struggled with this, but I've always been a bit of a worrier or someone who will be a little bit nervous about thinking of, especially when things are uncertain. And that will cause me to have some anxiety, maybe to some degree. And I pray about it. And I certainly try to do certain activities that help me relieve it. But fully relinquishing it always has been a challenge. I know my 75-year-old self would tell me, okay, all those things you worried about, they amounted to a hill of beans because we made it, we're here, and there were so many lessons. I think the other part is, and this is because of what I'm dealing with now, but I know we were uncovering it, and I think our BrainWise friends will relate, or some will relate to this possibly. In the Western world, depending on kind of your familial upbringing, but your career becomes the defining characteristic of who you are. And not that everyone in my family did this, but there were several. The conversations centered around what we do versus who we are and what we want to accomplish in terms of how we're experiencing the world, and really being rooted in that part of our identity. It was more around what do we do? How's your career going? And then what's happening in society right now? And I would tell myself, don't let your career be your defining characteristics. Don't let it be the single purpose or single part of your compass that's guiding you. The other part, I think, is spend more time with family and friends. I know will be a big part of it because their life is so fleeting. It's so short-lived that the more time we can spend with those we care about, I think, is the better. In a kind of rapid fire way, without reading the whole letter, those are probably the four things that I know today that my 75-year-old self would tell me.
Those are good for off the top of your head. If it's okay with you, I'd like to give you a little bit of advice. And that is, when you write the letter, avoid writing, don't do this, don't do that, don't do something. Flip it into what the positive aspect is. And you did that at the end. Spend more time with your family.
Define yourself by more than your career.
There we go. That's exactly right. And that's easier for the brain, because when you say don't do something, it's like saying to the brain, don't think of a purple elephant. So the first thing the brain thinks of is a purple elephant. But it's good to anchor those positive statements into the brain rather than the negative ones.
I love it. And I have a question for you, Phil, and this is probably for our BrainWise friends. When we think about our future, each of these activities that we do over the next series of discussions, maybe we should give them a why are we doing this particular exercise? So we just wrote ourselves a letter. We're encouraging to write a letter as a future self to us now. Why are we doing that from a neuroscience perspective? And probably more importantly, why are we doing that as a part of planning our future?
Great questions. And what I would typically do if I were working one-on-one with somebody is wait till after they had at least tackled it before I did the explanation why. But if we're going to dig into the explanation why, is it gets us out of our regular thinking box. Our thinking box tends to be standing in the present and looking forward. And what we tend to do is we tend to project on a linear fashion. What we are today, we're going to project it linearly into the future. Sitting in that beautiful armchair in front of the fire, looking backwards, maybe turns the brain around a little bit. So it's looking at life from a slightly different perspective. And sometimes that gives our non-conscious brain an opportunity to say, hey, listen to this guy. And waves a flag in the back and say, yeah, you're not paying attention. I told you last year, take care of your health more, or stop smoking, or whatever it might have been, and live a healthier lifestyle, get out into the country more, any of those things. And as I said, the non-conscious brain is not taking life. The non-conscious brain doesn't work linearly. It works,
Mm.
and it also works in symbols. And so you can actually find yourself when you're thinking in the future like that, allowing your brain to, if you like, expand its thinking, you may find some symbols are coming up rather than just the words and the categories.
No, I think it's great. And I think for our BrainWise friends who are listening, these are activities that it's building data points around what is it that you want your future state to look like, right? And what advice might you follow? I think between what we did last episode and what we're doing today, it's building a richer future of what, and all of these activities help us do that. Because then when we get to the part of defining our present and our pathway, we now have data points and pieces we can pull from to begin to build that out. Just wanted to share that with our BrainWise friends because I think it helps to put into context.
Yes. And so digging one level deeper on that dynamic that you talked about is when we get to talking about the present, you've established a sort of an ideal, a projected ideal, and you're more likely as you're looking through what you're doing right now is going, oh, yeah, that helps to get where I want to be. Oh, that one might get in my way. And so it sets a threshold, if you like, of each of those other thoughts you're going to have in the future.
I love it. No, I think it's perfect. And we, so far, to build my future and then really the activities we're giving to our BrainWise friends, we've done the Ikigai, we've done the pictures of the future, and now we've talked about our future self letter. I don't know if that's what it's called, but that's what I just lovingly called it today. And those are three components. What's the next one of helping to build a richer future vision for my life?
But it's like, it's piggybacking on something you said probably about 10 minutes, 8 minutes, 10 minutes ago. And that is, how much of it, if your future description is around what I'll call, and I think you made this reference, a human doing rather than a human being. And let's step back. I think we may have talked about this, but the human doing is your career, the car you're going to drive, the house you're going to live in, the amount of money you've got in the bank, your 401k plan, whatever it might be. Those are material things or activities that you do. Equally important is who you are, how you show up. And I would encourage people, our listeners particularly, to say, let's make certain that I've got a balance between those two sets of statements. It's not one's better than the other. They're both necessary. But if you can keep the sort of attention 50-50, then you can probably get life a little bit more into balance.
I think it's 100%, it's perfect because we do a lot of times define, like I just said, our kind of overall essence as what we do, what we have, all of these things that quite honestly are materialistic and we can't really use after a certain point. But if we can define, and that we use, and I think we use those pieces to help define what we want our legacy to be. But in reality, our legacy that is actually going to be left behind isn't going to be any of those things because those are trivial by nature. It's going to be how did we show up for people, how we are engaging with others, and what we want to be known for is where truly our legacy is going to make an impact, at least in my opinion. And so I think it's really great to be able to think of both of those in parallel. So what's the activity to help me do that?
So I've got a couple of questions that we can actually do in real time, if you like. And that is, and if our BrainWise listeners want to want a copy of this list, it's typically a list of things that I use when I'm coaching people. And so we may get through this whole list. One of the things we might do, Cole, is as we go through these different conversations, we could have AI take the transcript. Over time, when we've done them all, you'll have a little booklet about what your future is and the transition map. If you're willing to share it, people can actually use that as a role model for how they could discuss their own lives.
I love it. Let's do it.
All right. So, I'm just going to fire a couple of questions. And if you go next, then swipe left, swipe right, whatever you want to do with this. So what are some of the fundamental principles that you stand for that you want to hold tightly into the future?
Honesty, integrity, values is one of the words. I would, instead of saying values, morality, empathy. I would say those are the five, the kind of at the top of my head come to me.
And one of the things that would happen if you were writing these down is that in 10 minutes time, or when you're having a coffee or something, another one would come to your mind. And it might be one that comes to your mind. You go, oh no, it's at least as important as the others. So don't worry about getting everything down in one go. Our brains don't work very well like that. So these are all things that, and our non-conscious brain picks this up and starts to process it in the background.
And I would probably say one of them that overall describes that is I don't know if this is a value or how I would determine it that way, but I want to be the best Christ-like example that I can be while on this earth.
There we go.
And that encompasses everything of what I want to stand for.
Okay. And again, these aren't necessary values or principles or qualities. I don't care about the label. What I do care about is that people start to identify it and say, hey, that's my North Star. That's where I'm headed. What are some of the areas that you are not focusing on at the moment that you'd like to be passionate about?
Areas that I'm not focusing on that I would like to be passionate about. I'd probably like to read a bit more for pleasure. I love to read romance novels, and so I think that would be one. Two is we're doing this and we're actively doing it, but I'd like to do even more is building intentional couple relationships between. So Joey and I would have couples that we build like a really rich friendship with, that we can encourage each other and that live like-minded lives. Doesn't have to be the same life, but we basically prescribe the same value system. So that way we can encourage each other as couples to live life in the way that we want to live life. So that would be another. And then if all obstacles were out of the way and I could really just do it in a leisurely way, I would love to bake more. I do some baking now, but one, I don't like to clean it up. So I need a little helper to help me clean up along the way. But then two is just life gets in the way. There's just so much going on, but I would like to do that more. So those are probably the three things that I would enjoy doing more. BrainWise friends, we'll pause here for now. Stay tuned for the next segment that launches right after this, where we are going to dig deeper into how those patterns shape our future. Until then, stay curious, stay compassionate, and always stay brainwise.